Welcome back. We shall now have a look at standards for examination of documents. We shall have a quick review of the ISBP, the International Standard Banking Practices, UCP publication number 745. Misspelling or typing errors, example model 123 or model 321, will not be considered as compliant documents. But if the misspelling or typing error is happening in anywhere else other than the goods description part or another such a significant area, then it will be considered as a complying document and not a discrepancy. The checking of the documents will be based on what is it in the bank's view and whether it appear on their face of the document to be compliant on base of documents alone. So we will not be checking based on any other document but on the document submitted. We will be checking whether it is compliant, and the examination will not be to find a discrepancy but to find compliance or observe compliance. And what we are looking for is to appear on their face. So the face of the document is what we will look at, and it is in the bank's view, not in the view of any other party. So, for example, if a transport document is said to be compliant to the LC requirements as per the issuing carrier's agent, the banks may not take their view, but banks will take their own view to see whether the transport document so issued contains the data input in a fashion acceptable to the bank as per the UCP, as per the LC and International Standard Banking Practice. Abbreviations, if used in the credit, then the document may say the same abbreviation or any other equivalent abbreviation internationally accepted and as a substitution for the given word. Virgules or slash means one or more of the options given can be chosen by the beneficiary to be expressed in the document. The need for certificate to be signed is based on the what certificate it is called for. The dating requirement is on basis of the certification again. So the certificates will have to be signed, and the dating will be based on what's the content of the certificate. For example, if the age of the vessel is called for, it need not be dated, but it can just say the vessel is 25 years old as on the date of shipment, and the date of shipment and the or it can say a particular year on which the vessel was built, and if it is within the 25 years, the whatever is called for by the documentary credit, then it would be considered as not necessarily dated, but evidences the requirement and fulfills the function. If a certification or doc is given by the same entity as issuer, separate sign is not required. The UCP Articles 19 to 25 and Article 14C will not apply to copy of the transport documents. Also, the corrections need not be authenticated, need not be signed, or need not be dated, copy documents. The documents issued by beneficiary need not be authenticated unless it is a draft, and if it is a draft, it has to be accepted by the issuing bank to have corrections and alterations and draft. If the issuing bank or their country has any other regulation, the LC has to stipulate, and that has to be complied with. Alterations in any other document will have to be authenticated by the party who is issuing or endorsing such a document or their representative. For example, if there is a correction transport document, any agent of the carrier can authenticate such a transport document. If there are alterations or corrections more than one in a document, it has to be authenticated separately, or all of them have to be linked together, and a single authentication is enough. Use of multiple type styles or fonts or handwriting by itself does not make it a addition or alteration or a correction. Now, calling for a pre-shipment certificate by itself does not mean the inspection has to happen prior to the shipment. So the LC has to be the documentary credit has to be very specific in what is required, and compliance with such a requirement can be met either by the title or by the content or by the date of issuance of the specific event called for in the credit, like pre-shipment inspection. The date of signing is considered to be the date of issuance. So if a bill of lading is dated a particular date and onboard is given next date, then we consider the onboard date as a date of issuance. Similarly, any other document, if it has a date along with the signature, then that date will be considered as an issuing date of such a document. Interpretation of dates. So certain words used along with the dates is that from or after or within or not later than and at least. And if from and after are used, it will be excluded and it will be considered as a day 0. If it is within 2 days, then it is considered as a total of 5 days, including the particular day given. And if it is not later than, that means that is the latest date for which a particular action can be taken under the documentary credit. It is recommended that month be stated in words while indicating the date. For example, if you are talking about December, then DEC or DECEMBR should be used, preferably, so that there is no confusion, because there are two formats of writing dates, one being having month before and the date later, and the second one being date, month and year, DDMMYY. So this MM, which stands in the middle or stands in the end, depends upon what date it is, and so to make it easier and clear, it is better to use the words. But any format could be used, and in any form it could be mentioned DDMMYY or only YY or 4-letter year and things like that, provided the date can be easily identified from any other document so presented. The box field or space for data to be inserted. Any box field or space for data to be inserted in any document need not compulsorily be completed. It can be left blank. It could be even called as a signature field, but it could be left blank unless the letter of the document itself says, and if it is left blank, it is invalid. There are certain documents which are not considered as transport document as per the UCP. That is, Article 19 to 24 is not applicable, and the documents are delivery note, cargo receipt, forward receipt, meets receipt, and other similar documents. Now, what are shipping documents? Shipping documents are all documents required by the credit except draft and teletransmission reports or courier receipt. What is it? The LC may call for invoice, LC may call for a packing list, LC may call for a transport document, an insurance document, evidence that one set of documents have been sent to the applicant by means of fax, evidence that one set of applicants or one copy of applicants have been sent to the applicant, and the courier receipt evidencing having sent such documents, things like that. So the fax transmission report or a courier receipt calling for evidence of having sent those documents and the bill of exchanges will not be considered as shipping document. All other documents called for by the credit are considered as shipping documents. What are stale documents? Stale documents are the quasi-negotiable instrument which are dated more than 21 days. So the quasi-negotiable instrument like a bill of lading is considered stale if it is presented after 21 days. Stale document acceptable means it can be presented after 21 days. Stale documents not accepted means it has no such meaning. And third-party documents acceptable means UCP 600 does not indicate issuer for certain documents like draft, like invoices, like a transport document, like insurance document. Such documents can be issued by a party other than beneficiary. And if they mean third-party documents not acceptable, then the letter of credit has to stipulate what they mean and what should be the title, content, and form of such documents and who should be the issuer. Likewise, stale documents not acceptable means the 21-day period allowed by the UCP will be straightaway applicable unless the credit states any other presentation period. Now, exporting country. Exporting country could be one of these four. One is the country in which the beneficiary is domiciled. Another is the place where the goods have originated, or the place where the goods have been received by the carrier, or the place from where the dispatch or shipment is being made. So, one of these four places or countries will be considered as exporting country. Shipping company. Shipping company could mean any agent of the carrier, master, owner, or charterer, or could be the carrier, master, owner, or charterer. Normally, we will not have agents for charterer, but we will have agents for carrier, master, or owner. Now, documents acceptable as presented. When the credit says documents acceptable as presented, then the document examiner at the nominated bank for negotiation or the confirmation will limit their examination of documents not to the full UCP but to certain aspects only. And what are those aspects? Whether the stipulated documents have been presented, whether it is within the expiry date, whether the credit is still valid, and whether the amount is within what is available to be drawn under the credit. And no further examination will be happening for those documents. No other article will be applied. This is what it means: documents acceptable as presented. And the applicant and the issuing bank should be willing to accept the risk of having this clause in the LC. When a document is required to be signed by a specific entity, say Chamber of Commerce, it is considered to have been completed by using of the letterhead of that entity, or completed or signed by entity, or for and on behalf of that entity. So when a certificate is issued by Secretary for Chamber of Commerce, it is considered to be this certificate issued by Chamber of Commerce. Whether it is signed as clerk, as issuer, as data entry operator, as secretary, as president, whatever it is, it will be considered as a certificate of the Chamber of Commerce. Data required by the credit should be in the language stipulated by the credit. The credit should say the data required in the credit should be in what language. Suppose it says English, then it should be the data required by the credit and the data required by UCP. These two items should be in the language mentioned in the credit, that is English. Now, if the credit says it can be English, Spanish, or French, then the nominated bank has to restrict whether all the three languages are acceptable or whether it is only one. If they do not restrict, and if documents are submitted in multiple languages, then the nominated bank will have to examine the document in all the given languages in the document. The name of the person or entity, the stamps, the legalization, the endorsements, and other pre-printed text can be in a language other than credit. Irrespective of the fact that whether credit specifies any particular language or the specific credit gives multiple languages and nominated bank had restricted or not, there can be some content in the document which is in a language other than called for in the credit or allowed by the credit, and these are the name of the person or the stamps or the legalizations or endorsements or other pre-printed text. Now, banks will not examine the information inserted in a language in addition to what is called for in the credit. If the credit specifies English, whatever is given in addition to English, bank will not examine. If the credit does not specify, then the documents can be submitted in any languages. Banks, with respect to totals, will examine only for consistency with regards to the amount, quantity, weight, and number of packages, and they will examine to the extent that these do not contradict with the information given in the credit or any other stipulated documents, but further details of the calculations or other things will not be examined by the banks. When a document consists of more than one page, the parties will have to ensure continuity and linkage. It can be by numbering the pages, it can be by stapling, it can be being binding together, whatever it is. And such a set of pages which are made to be considered as a single document will be examined as a single document. And in such cases, it can be signed in the first or last page or anywhere else unless the credit specifies. Now, if there is a condition without stipulating a document, if there is a condition without stipulating the document which has to evidence compliance with that condition, it is called a non-documentary condition, and it will be in the normal course disregarded. That is, compliance with such a condition need not be evidenced on any document. If there is a non-documentary condition, it will be disregarded. That is, the compliance with such a document need not be evidenced in any stipulated document. But if it is if the data relevant to such a condition is contained in any stipulated document, then that should not be in conflict with the documentary credit. If the data related to such a non-documentary condition is evidenced in any of the stipulated documents, it should not be in conflict with the credit. Now, what will be considered as an original? The apparently original signature, a mark or a stamp or label in any document. Whether this signature or stamp may be manual or may be facsimile, it will be considered as an original. If a document has an original signature or mark or stamp or label, it will be considered as an original, whether it is manual or facsimile, and if it appears to be an intention to authenticate. Now, original, duplicate, replicate, or first one original are all equally functional originals, and any word can be used to notify an original. The number of originals presented should be the minimum number required by the credit. So, if the credit calls for 3 originals, minimum 3 originals should be there, but there can be 4. Now, the full set has to be submitted. If a document says it is issued in 3 originals, then all the 3 originals will have to be submitted, even if the LC calls for only 2 originals. If there are multiple originals and the documentary credit gives a disposal instruction of only some of them, in case of a 3x3 BL, if the documentary credit talks about only 2x3 BL and 1x3 BL it doesn't talk about, then the presenter can submit all the 3 originals. So the documentary credit has to give disposal of all the originals, and if not, all the remaining originals will be submitted to the bank. If the documentary credit gives disposal of all the 3 originals and calls for only copies, then the original should not be submitted to the bank. Invoice in 4 copies could mean 1 plus 3 invoices, while invoice in 1 copy could mean 1 original and not 1 copy. Photocopy of an invoice, if it is called for original, can be submitted unless and until the credit prohibits the submission of originals and credit demands only copies be submitted. So only a copy should be submitted if the credit prohibits submission of an original. Any document, whenever an invoice is called for, one original will have to be submitted. Invoice or transport document or whatever is called for, whatever certificates and what packing list and etc. is called for, one original of every called for document is required, and one original or one copy will mean one original will have to be submitted. Invoice in 1 copy or 1 copy of invoice both means one original is required. If the credit provides for disposal of all originals, then only copy should be submitted. Originals are to be signed when required by the credit. Original documents are to be signed when required by the credit or required by the document itself. If the document says there's a column for signature and is left unfilled and there is nothing else, then that will have to be signed. If the document says it's invalid if it is not signed, it will have to be signed. If the document says it's invalid unless it is endorsed or countersigned by another party, it will have to be signed. Or if the UCP calls for signature of the document, it will be signed. So by this, the invoice need not be technically signed. So that is why we have seen LCs calling for manually signed invoices. Copies of the document need not be signed. Now regarding shipping mark. Shipping mark is a mark to identify the package or identify the goods to enable the agents and other parties not related to the buyer and seller to handle the goods. Now the documents mentioning the shipping mark are to show those details stated in the credit. If the credit has some details on shipping mark, the documents has to show those details. Some documents may show extra shipping mark and some documents may show less. If it is a shipment by container, the bill of lading will contain only the container number, while other documents may contain more information. It could be information regarding the type of goods, the way of handling, the way it has to be the fragile or otherwise, whether it can be loose shunted or not, whether it has been packed in wooden boxes or not. All those information will be mentioned in the shipping mark. Some data excess or some data short is not considered as a discrepancy. And signatures can be need not be handwritten. Signatures need not be handwritten. It can be any mechanical or electronic method of authentication. But when we say electronic method of authentication, suppose a document says paragraphs that this document has been electronically authenticated, electronically signed, and so does not require a manual signature, etc., etc. It does not mean it has been electronically authenticated. The indication of the text that this has been electronically authenticated does not evidence that it has been electronically authenticated. But at the same time, it says the authentication of this document can be verified by clicking on this link or going to this website or looking into this particular address, whether this number has been issued on. All those information means it has been electronically authenticated. And at the same time, banks are not responsible to go into that link, go into that URL, go into that website and check whether it is authentic or not. Banks are not responsible to do that. But again, if it is an EUCP presentation, then banks will have to look into whether it has been electronically authenticated for their acceptance. A signature on the letterhead paper of an entity is considered to be the document issued by that entity, irrespective of the fact that who signed on that entity and in what capacity. A box filled or say space per signature does not itself mean it has to be filled with a signature. If a document says it is invalid unless countersigned by a party, then it has to be countersigned by that party. Mostly, you will find this in insurance documents when an insurance certificate is issued and it will have to be countersigned by. When an insurance certificate is used and it will have to be countersigned by the insuring party, most probably in most of the cases we will see that the beneficiary will be countersigning that insurance, saying it is issued for and on their behalf. And this will happen when there is a master policy issued and the insurance company will give a link to the party, and they will be creating this insurance document. The signature of the insuring company will be by means of a facsimile pre-printed, and the signature of the beneficiary or the shipper who is issuing this under the open policy will be on the manual facsimile manner. Documents can be titled as called for in the credit, bear a similar title or untitled. So when a packing list is called for, it can be called packing list, it can be called details of packing, it can be called a certificate of packing, it can be called so many things. So it can bear a similar title, it can be untitled, or it can be titled as for called for the credit. So when a packing list is called for, if details of packing are given on a sheet of paper and it is signed or dated as required by the credit, but if there is no title, still it will have to be considered as a packing list and examined under the requirements of the UCP and credit. It cannot be said that this document is not a document called for or stipulated, and so we are not examining the document and we cannot return it. The content of the document must appear to fulfill the function. The content of the document should appear to fulfill the function. Now, this is applicable for general documents which are not given in detail by the credit. That is, the draft, the invoice, the transport, and the insurance are dealt in detail by the UCP. And for other documents, this specific paragraph as SBP gives the guidance. Now, if the documents required by the credit are to be separated as separate documents, then two originals will have to be submitted. Two originals of combined packing and wait list has to be submitted, or one packing list and one wait list will have to be submitted. When credit calls for a packing list and a wait list, we can submit two originals of a combined packing and a wait list, or one original of packing and one original of wait list will have to be submitted. When the document covers two functions, when a document called for by the credit covers two functions, we can submit two certificates or one certificate that fulfills each of those functions. That is, a certificate of quality and quantity can be called for by the credit, and we can submit one certificate of quality and one certificate of quantity as a compliant documents under the credit, or we can submit one certificate of quality and quantity, and the contents of the certificate should be having details of certification regarding quality and certification regarding quantity. The documents not to be in conflict with one another. The documents not stipulated will not be examined and will be returned. Non-documentary conditions will be considered as not stipulated and will be disregarded. Article 14H of the UCP allows us it to be disregarded. So, if the data related to non-documentary conditions mentioned in any document, it has to be complying with the credit and other stipulated documents. The determination whether the presentation is compliant or the presentation is compliant or the presentation is discrepant and non-conforming is based on the document examiner's view alone. It is based on the documents alone, whether they appear on their face. The stipulated documents is what we will check, and it is a banker's view, and it is on the face of the document, not a forensic examination of the document. And what is examined? It is examined whether or not the presentation is compliant. We are not trying to examine whether or not the presentation is discrepant. We are not trying to see whether it is non-conforming. We are trying to see whether it is conforming. That is the intention of the examination. Compliant with what? Compliant with the UCP, compliant with the credit, and compliant with international standard banking practices with respect to presentation of documents under the credit. Now, if it is found to be compliant, then the party examining documents is obligated to take up the presentation. The nominated bank or the confirming bank will have to take up the documents and then provide reimbursement, that is settlement. They have to settle the document presented, either by paying at site or by undertaking to pay on a deferred date and things like that. The document examiner is not influenced by anything else. The document examiner is not influenced by anything else except established fraud. If there is a suspicion that there is a fraud, or in nowadays, because if there is a breach of boycott or sanctions regulations, then that will be the guiding principle for the behavior of the document examiner. Otherwise, nothing else other than the credit, UCP and ISBP should be the guiding principle for the examiner to accept or reject a presentation made. Banks are not responsible for the content of the documents and the conduct of the issuer or the other parties related to the document. That is, the disclaimer talks about the carrier, the insured, the applicant, the beneficiary, any of the party can behave in any of the fashion, and banks could not be held responsible for the actions of those parties. Banks are not responsible for the content of the document, or for the goods, or for the quality, or for the sufficiency or adequacy of the documents, or the capability of performance of the parties or the goods. Now, bank also says any issuer except the beneficiary can issue certain documents. When the words like first class, well known, qualified, independent are used. So when these qualifiers are used, it means a party other than beneficiary can issue such a document, and it should be acceptable. Bank will accept as original any apparently original signature, mark or stamp. So if there is a signature, mark or stamp or label of the issuer, and if it appears to be written, typed or perforated or stamped, that is facsimile or manual, and or if it appears to be in original stationery, or if it states original, then all these four indicators are indicators that it is an original document, and bank will accept such a document. If copies are called for, either original or copy may be presented. If copies are called for, even original can be submitted and it will be acceptable. So if 3 copies are called for and 1 original, we can submit a 2+2 or 3+2, it should be okay. Minimum 1 original is required, but a number of originals is not restricted. If copies are called for, it can be submitted. Now, let us look at examination with reference to one another. We have seen the examination of documents with respect to the credit. We have seen examination of documents with respect to the UCP. Now we shall look at the examination of documents with reference to one another. Intra-document or inter-document data conflict is what we should be focusing on. If the data in the document submitted, the stipulated document submitted, if they are not, if they are in conflict with each other, then it will be considered as a discrepancy. But there are certain exceptions, like goods description need not be complete and comprehensive in all documents. Shipping marks may not be exactly same in all documents. The name and address of the beneficiary, the address portion, the PIN code or the zip code or the fax and phone number, these details need not be mentioned in all the documents. In certain situations, if they are in the same country, it is okay. So those, other than those matters, otherwise the data in the document should not be in conflict with each other. The data appearing in the document should not be in conflict with other data appearing in the document, any other stipulated document, documented credit. These are the 3 items that will be looked into. Suppose if there is a bill of lading, and suppose there is an insurance document, within the insurance document, the goods description should not be in conflict. Within the transport document, the goods description should not be in conflict with each other, and the goods description given in the transport document and the goods description given in the insurance document should not be in conflict with each other. This means that they should not correspond, need not correspond with what is given in the, need not correspond with what is given in the credit, need not correspond with what is given in the invoice. It need not be a mirror image, but the data, if the goods, if it calls as steel rods, then the insurance document should also say something similar to steel rods. It cannot say steel files or any other thing. Could even the words using pig steel and other classifications or definitions of steel used in different documents could make the document discrepant, because the document examiner is not an industry expert. He will not be able to examine whether the different words in the industry means the same and one and the same product. And so what is mentioned in the credit should be properly in detail or adequate detail, and it should not be too much, should not have excess details. So it is for the applicant and issuing bank to determine what should be the content and how it should be evidenced in which document. Thereafter, the invoice should be having the goods description exactly what is mentioned in the credit. It can be in bits and pieces in different places, but all put together should correspond to what is in the credit. No mirror image is called for. And in other documents, it can be in general terms. But when we say general terms in transport document, insurance documents, or data of origin and other things, it should not be in conflict with the credit or the data in other stipulated documents or the documented credit, the data in the document itself. Document checklist is of immense help in this regard to the document examiner. So document examiner will draw up a document checklist. First of all, it will be identifying what document we are checking and relating to which LC. So when you have a letter of credit identified, then you will also have relevance to whether installment shipments are applicable, whether revolving credit is there, whether it has been a transferred credit, whether it has been confirmed and who has had a confirmation, and the liabilities, whether reimbursement is available, whether it is subject to IRU and things like that. All that information will be basically filled in to give a bird's eye view to the examiner as to what are all the relevant aspects that may cause a non-conformance situation or a conflict with the existing standard against which it has to be checked. Thereafter, the addressee is of very importance. Whether the document checker is checking or examining a document addressed to him or her. So if the document examiner finds that what he is checking or the presentation is not addressed to the checker or examiner, then there is no fun in doing it. We have to find out what role we are playing. So if the documents are present to the nominated bank, and if the documents are addressed to addressed to issuing bank, the document presentation schedule is addressed to issuing bank and not to the nominated bank, then the nominated bank will not know whether the beneficiary is expecting the nominated bank to act in what capacity. So there should be descriptions and instructions from the beneficiary on what is required. Are they expecting the nominated bank to honor, or are they expecting just to forward the documents, or are they expecting the nominated bank to take up the documentary risk by examining and confirming whether it is compliant or not, and things like that. The date of presentation is very important to find out whether it is presented on time. The amount, how much is the drawing under the credit, what are the documents that are presented, and the listing. Tomorrow, somebody should not claim that all the 3 original transport documents were given, and so the listing of the documents on the presentation schedule is of very much significance to ensure compliance with the credit. The instruction could be with regards to handling of the document, with regards to handling of the discrepant document, with regards to handling of the remittances or proceeds of the presentation, and things like that. And the beneficiary or the presenter should also have comments on what are their comments on the amendments, so that examiner will know whether out of 5 amendments, say only 4 have been accepted, or 3 have been accepted, or none have been accepted, or all the amendments have been taken into account in making this presentation. Who is the drawee or payee of the drafts, whether there are any restricted endorsements, and if there are any corrections, whether it is acceptable as per the jurisdiction. Invoice is not a professional invoice. Description of the invoice corresponds to the credit. It should not be overdrawn, and if it is overdrawn, the amount drawn under the credit, or the amount claimed under the credit, or the amount of negotiation, or the amount of demand under the draft or the presentation should be well within the credit available amount. The invoice can be for a higher amount, but the amount drawn should be well within the amount available on the credit. No additional goods are mentioned in the invoice, even if it is free of charge or non-commercial value or whatever. In case of a transport document, the carrier has to be identified, and that has to be signed as per UCP as agents for carrier and things like that. Agents have to be identified. The capacity and identity of the party signing should be there. A proper onboard should be there. All the full set originals should be given, and it should be consigned or endorsed as required in the credit. If it is to the order of the issuing bank, it is well and good. If it is to the order of the shipper, then it has to be endorsed in favor of the blank endorsed, so that the title can pass on to the nominated bank, to the confirming bank, to the issuing bank, and to the applicant ultimately. The notified party should be as mentioned in the credit. The fax number, phone number, and things like that should be exactly as per the credit, in case the notified party mentioned is as specified in the credit. If the credit is not specifying, the notified party can be any party. If they are using applicant as a notified party in the document, and the credit does not stipulate a notified party, then the applicant's phone number, fax number, pin code, and things like that need not be as per the credit. The freight details should be there, whether freight has been prepaid, whether it is payable, and then there should be no indication that if the check is disordered, freight is not the document will not be valid, and things like that. It should also have details of the settling agent, the delivery agent. That delivery agent need not be in the same country as the applicant unless it is called for, and things like that. Insurance coverage. If there is an insurance policy called for, is it is called for, whether the certificate has been submitted or a cover note has been submitted, and what is acceptable, what is the effectiveness of the document, whether the dates are acceptable, what are the covers given in the credit, whether the cover called for in the credit has been mentioned in the insurance policy, who is the underwriter, have they been identified as a party who takes the risk to pay under the insurance policy, is the claim settler identified, and whether the insurance policy has been properly endorsed or issued in a fashion that the title passes on to the buyer before the payment is being effected. Now we shall see about the other aspects in a short while in the next video. Please keep coming.